Happy Wednesday, everybody. This is such an incredible month, and it's an incredible time to just be diving into our businesses. A lot of people are thinking about money, they're thinking about taxes, they're thinking about booking. Hopefully you are booking up a storm. If you are not, we actually have an episode for that. I wasn't even planning on that. We have an episode, What to Do When You're Not Booking. You can go listen to that. And this season is just so good, but something too that a lot of people aren't thinking about during this time. And honestly, for me, in the first few years of my business, I didn't think about is retirement and saving, and just, you're not even planning for the worst. You're just planning to be, you're almost like, it's the wise thing to do. And I was not the best at it. And a lot of us aren't. But recently I've started the past few years, and I recently started the SEP IRA, which we'll talk about during the episode, what that is. If you're like, what do those numbers even mean? What do those letters mean? This will be a good episode for you. It'll also be fun because it's kind of a personalized, casual approach to money and retirement. And, you know, what does it mean when we say tax savings? What does it mean when we say IRA? And what does it mean when we say, you know, LLC and S-Corp? And we're going to approach this from a financial standpoint, not necessarily the legal standpoint. And of course, our guest, he is just a photographer like us. He's awesome, and he's just been doing it for a long time, and he's had some really great influences on his life, and he's got the discipline to make it happen. So I wanted to have Pat Furey on, and he's just so much fun. Him and Claire, his wife, they are incredible photographers out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They shoot a lot in New York City. They shoot in Iceland. They have a super cute dog, and they are just killing it right now, and they've been killing it for a long time. And so I wanted to have Pat on just to talk about finances, money, tax savings, planning, etc., because I know it's something you guys are talking about. In my mentorship meeting last night, we were talking about money and pricing, and I've been diving into my profitability and what that looks like, and it's just so good. It's something valuable that you guys need to talk about. So without any further ado, my good friend and awesome person, Pat Furey. Pat, how's it going, man?
It's good. How are you?
Good. I'm excited to have you on, and of course we were talking in the pre-show. Everybody who comes on, I try to, it's everybody's first time on a podcast, or they've maybe only been on a few times, and so I try to give as much information as I can, and obviously like send you guys a few emails, like, hey, here's the best thing for audio, and just so we can have a really present conversation. And you had told me like, hey, I hope my AirPods sound good. And then you informed me just now that you're using your wife's, Claire's, PlayStation headset. Is that right?
That is right. Yeah, we're big fans of video games. We actually bought a second PlayStation 4 this year so we could play Fortnite together, which is kind of ridiculous. And I actually, as well, we first met for the first time at Workshop, which was in Brooklyn this last November. One of the co-owners of Workshop and we all play Fortnite together, Claire included. So I'm using Claire's headset that we normally use to play video games together. And I hope it sounds better than the AirPods would.
That is amazing. It sounds pretty good to me, man. It sounds pretty good. The best person we've ever had on that sound quality wise was a few weeks ago, actually. We had this guy, Mike McAllowitz. He wrote Profit First. And we had him on, and he does like his own podcast, right? So he had his whole mic set up, and I was like, usually when I sign on, people are like, Adam, you sound pretty good. And then when he signed on, I was like, whoa, you sound amazing, bro.
He's in like an acoustically treated room, most likely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's next level. I'm using a old PlayStation 4 headset that's like wired. But hopefully it sounds good.
I love it. That's awesome. So other than Fortnite, were you guys big gamers before then? Like, what did you guys play?
I've gamed my whole life. All sorts of video games. It's funny, Claire and I both are big nerds. We used to play World of Warcraft, not together, but it was something that when we found out about each other, we were like, oh wow, this is super weird, but it was awesome. So yeah, I mean, I've been gaming since I was a kid. Probably the first console I played on was Genesis, like Sega Genesis back in the day. Yeah, and throughout my whole life, I mean, there are periods and lulls of times when I didn't game, but now we're gaming. It's winter. We have a little bit of downtime, so we're gaming more than we normally do for sure. Wedding season, video games don't usually mix too well.
Totally. It just kills your productivity. Yeah, that's hilarious. Do you, so I actually shot a couple late last year in October, and they were awesome. They were super fun, but they were they loved video games and they loved board games and they just loved spending time together. And the funniest thing is the majority of the groomsmen were all part of his WoW guild, and they had been
awesome.
playing together. They had been playing together for like 13 years, and one of the they got married on a boat, and so one of the captains comes out, and or I guess the captain comes out, and they had their own guild flag, and the guy took down like the boat's flag and raised their WoW guild flag, and I was like, "What in the world is happening?" It was amazing.
And you were shooting this wedding? That's amazing.
Yeah, it was so cool. And like the captain then like looks over at the groom and he's like, "Is this ship is that an alliance flag or something like that?" And it was so meta, and I had no idea what was going on. I've never played WoW in my life. I've seen it. I know that there are orcs and stuff, and Alex is going to kill me and my groom. He's going to laugh his face off. But it was so cool, and I was just like, all right, like it's 2019 and it's people can play video games and still be productive members of society.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like I was saying, WoW was like 15 years ago. It was I played in high school. It was a long time ago. But I mean, like I said, we play Fortnite. We used to play on a pretty regular basis with Ryan Brown, who runs Forge in the North, who's also the co-owner of Workshop. And he's like super productive member of society. He has a kid on the way. Great human being. But like, I mean, people like that. We play with a guy who he actually wrote a Super Bowl ad in this most recent Super Bowl where the NFL players were kind of like running between tables. If anyone's seen the Super Bowl, they probably know the ad. His name's Garrett Radford. He wrote that ad. We also play video games with him, which is just like insane. He wrote in the character from Fortnite, Ninja, very famous professional, like sort of esport player, into this commercial. Yeah. And I texted him, "Hey man, I definitely know that you were the one responsible for him being in this commercial." And he was like, "Yeah, 100%. So yeah, I mean, we all play video games together. There's nothing wrong with it. We're also like 30 years old. So I mean, it's totally the time we live in.
I love it, man. I was a big Halo fan in high school. That was like my guilty pleasure, was just Halo 2 and just killing it all. And then when I went to college, our network was weird, so we couldn't do matchmaking and we could only play locally. And then it eventually got boring. And we're totally off topic, but now my wife has a Nintendo Switch, and that's been really fun.
Yeah, I mean, Switches, it's the best way to kill time on an airplane. It like makes traveling, like it feels like cheat mode essentially. We went on our honeymoon about 2 years ago, and we had our flight down to Tulum. The whole time I was playing the Zelda that had come out around that time, and I forgot we were flying, and I'm not a good flyer. I'm a little nervous, and for me to just like get out of my head and just play a video game while flying and like having a cocktail or two was just like enjoyable. Like I look forward to it now.
You're like, I don't have to drive. Somebody's giving me alcohol, and I'm playing this really fun game, and that's hilarious, man.
And they had Wi-Fi. I mean, really, honestly, what else do I need?
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome, man. Well, now, 10 minutes or so in, people are like, why did I tune into this again? It's but when we finally got to meet at Workshop, it was so good to kind of put like the person with the identity that I had known online, and then I had seen you mention little tidbits of, both retirement and kind of savings plans and just how you manage your finances and stuff like that in little forums here and there. And I'd always see your name pop up, and I was like, oh, that's a good insight. And I literally have screenshots of things that you've said and took them into my notes and like just kind of kept them around. I was like, oh, that Pat Furey guy, like, oh, if I ever meet him, that'd be really cool. And so then we met, and I was like, I even took your class too, because I wanted to even kind of do more research and see what it was about. And it was great. It was awesome. It was super informative. And so, yeah, we wanted to have you on your show, and kind of just, honestly, this is going to be a little bit vague for people, but I figured we're in the new year. People are planning taxes. People are thinking about money. Business owners are thinking about money, right? And, like it's both booking season, but also tax season. So we're both like, what's going on here? And some people are experiencing extreme downtime, and maybe they haven't planned for that well. And so I just wanted to talk to you and kind of get the rundown on kind of everything financial and everything money related. But before we do that, tell me a little bit about you and Claire and how you got together, how you started shooting together, and how long you've been in business, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in New Jersey, in the suburbs of New Jersey. I was right between New York City and Philadelphia, sort of closer to the beach. So I was kind of between two big markets at the time. I went through high school, always sort of loved photography, but I would pick up hobbies, put down hobbies. I played guitar. I was into photography. Of course, we've gone through the video games. Nothing really stuck for me for a very long period of time until photography. And I just I couldn't get rid of it. So I don't think I intentionally chose to become a professional photographer. It was just this sort of evolution over time since high school. I became a professional photographer when I was 18 is when I formed my business, but I had been shooting since I was probably 15, and I'm just about to be 30 this year. So it's been quite a while. But the only job I've ever had in my life has been professional photography since I was 18. I went to college, did it through college, moved to Philly when I was probably like 22-ish, kind of moved out on my own. And yeah, I met Claire through a wedding planner, actually, who is like totally professional, not trying to set us up. She was like, she was new to town. She grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania. Her mom raised alpacas. Her dad was a pilot. Like, she grew up in the most like Huckleberry Finn way possible. It was just like an idyllic childhood. It's awesome. But she also graduated with 20 kids. So it was very different, her lifestyle, than mine was in suburban New Jersey. I graduated with like 1,000 people in high school. So we came from very different backgrounds, but she was moving to Philadelphia, didn't know anyone. So she reached out to a wedding planner. She knew, hey, like, I'm trying to make friends with some people. Do you know anyone? Well, she's like, I think you might get along with this guy. You have similar styles, similar mindset on life. I think you guys should meet. So she emails me. She was extremely professional, and I thought she was like 45 and married. I didn't look her up. I was just like, oh, there's no way. Like, she's just a professional trying to like reach out and network. And then we met at a coffee shop that I set up next to my apartment. The first apartment I ever lived in on my own. It was in Old City, Philadelphia. The coffee shop was next door to my apartment. I get a text message that morning from Claire. Hey, I'm really excited to meet you. I'll be there in a little bit. And I'm like, oh shit, I totally forgot. I forgot about our meeting. I for some reason I didn't write it down, which is super unprofessional of me. But I put a hat on, I threw a t-shirt on, I ran downstairs. I'm in this coffee shop looking for what I thought was a 45, maybe 50-year-old woman, just based on her very polite, very professional email. And there's only one person there. And I look over and I'm like, hey, Claire? She's like, oh, Pat. And I'm like, oh shit, I fucked up. I immediately was like, oh my God, I should have showered. I should have gotten dressed. I should have tried harder. But then we sat there and talked for probably 3 hours straight about photography and life. And we just like got along really well. And I asked her if she'd second shoot a wedding with me because I didn't know how to ask her out. And ever since that wedding, we've been pretty much inseparable. We've been together, we've been working together for probably 7 years now, 8 years out of the 11 years I've been shooting professionally. So Claire is definitely just as much of a part of what I do as I am. She just doesn't get as much credit because I had started the business, unfortunately, with my name and was afraid of rebranding.
That's a whole other episode. It was like,
that is an entire other episode. Yeah.
I'm afraid of rebranding and my name and SEO and everything.
Yep.
And yeah. Like, and what about all the backlinks?
When we met, I was very in the area. I was generally established. She was established more towards where she was from, which was like not as big of a wedding market. I was more established in New York City. So we just decided to like keep my name, and it's definitely something that we have to do at some point, but we're kind of waiting until things slow down until we jump through that rebrand hurdle.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's something we can get into, but even like the kind of planning financially for hypothetical like windfall, if that happened, like while you make that transition and stuff like that too.
Yeah, I think it's really smart. I think for me, so that being my background, I grew up in suburban New Jersey. I didn't grow up like dirt poor, but I didn't grow up like wealthy either. We were very like lower middle class, didn't have much money growing up. My parents are notoriously bad at managing finances. So as a child, I saw that from them, and I knew they didn't teach me what to do. They taught me what not to do. So I was like, okay, you probably shouldn't buy Christmas presents on a credit card. It's probably a bad idea. I've kind of since a kid, I guess, saw that and what happens when you don't manage money well. And I never wanted to go down that path for myself. So that was like this huge fire that was lit under my ass, even as a little kid. Don't do this. This is bad. This is what happens when you don't take these sort of things seriously. So I really believe that, in order to be creative forever, to be self-employed, you have to have enough money to sustain the ups and downs of self-employment. And everything could be amazing one year, and the next year you can have a down year. You might not have as much money as you'd like. We have W-2s from ourselves, but we'll get into that later. But we don't have like what most people in a 9-to-5 job would consider security. So we have to create that for ourselves financially. And it's something that I really, really believe in.
Were you always like that when like you first started the business? Did you always put something away for retirement and put something away for those kind of funds? Or like, I feel like for most people, you start your business and oh yeah, I guess you started really early. So, but for most people, like we are overlapping with a full time job, or maybe we take the leap, and then what happens is we are spending all our money on the business. We're eventually making no money personally, and eventually, over time, we start making money personally, and we're like, oh, okay, this is cool, this is great. But then, 5-7 years in, at least where I'm at right now, it's like, oh, okay, we've done well and we do well and things are consistent now, and it's not like we're not guessing, but how am I planning for the future, stuff like that. Like, did you do that immediately, or was there a certain point, like was there a certain dollar amount that you had or a certain revenue time that when you were like, okay, this is what we need to do?
So one of the best things I ever did early on in my life was the first year I ever filed taxes. I looked at the form and I had a heart attack. I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. This is out of my wheelhouse. I'm a photographer. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a CPA. This is not something that I feel comfortable with. So I went and I mean, my town wasn't very big. There weren't many people to choose from, but I found an accountant who actually I use him to this day. So it's been 10 plus years. We've learned and grown together. He had no idea what photography, how the business worked, but neither did I, to be honest. So I found someone who knew more about taxes than I did. And the first thing he did, he sat me down. He said, listen, you're 18. You're living at home. You need to be putting money away. It would be smart. You'll thank yourself later. And that was something that I don't know if I would have taken it as seriously if someone in that position had not told me to do that. So I always tell people, a lot of times you just need that idea. You need that spark. Okay, I should be doing this, or I should be doing that. And just having that spark from him for me at the time was, it changed my life completely. It just allowed me to start thinking about, okay, I really do need to take this a little bit more seriously than I would have if no one ever told me about this. And that's sort of when I dove into it personally. It wasn't necessarily a financial figure or anything other than someone told me this is something to do. And I looked into it and I researched it and it made a lot of sense. And then I went after it. But I was also, when I started my photography business, I was very financially minded. I really did not like spending money on the business because I figured, well, if I make, let's say $5,000 shooting a wedding and then I spend $5,000 on equipment, I've actually made nothing because I can't use this equipment for anything else. It's for shooting weddings. So for me, it was always just like running a tight ship and trying to save as much money as possible before I ended up moving out and kind of going on my own. But to your question, if you have another job, if you have a 9 to 5, if you're in an in-between sort of stage in your life and you're trying to transition to photography as a full-time career, I really think, having some leeway financially is going to do you more favors than not. My recommendation always is like, make sure that you have an emergency fund. Make sure you have, at least 6 to 12 months of runway saved up where you can not worry about it before you make that leap into full-time photography, or it might be more painful. Not everyone has to be a full-time photographer from the get-go. I think the slow organic growth is usually best.
Right. No, totally. We had a meeting with one of my mentees last night, and I was telling them, like they want to go full time and they have a full time job that they like, and I was like, that's the best place to be right now, is that we can do everything right and hopefully, slowly get to where you want to be rather than, kind of jumping ship or making a calculated decision. Or even, at least for me, like I remember when I went full time, the reason I left was, one, I'd run out of vacation days, and then two, I looked at my accounts payable, like what I was slated to get for the following year or, coming in. And I said, okay, yeah, I could live off that. And then that only represents, 12 weddings or 10 gigs or something like that. I'm sure I could find more work between now and the end of the year. And that's the leap that I took. And, but one, money was planning on coming in, which I had to make sure that number was good. And so, yeah, it's, the thing I've been working on this year is like trying to get a 6-month runway done for me, because I think that would be you make so many bad decisions out of scarcity mindset. It obviously the practical implications of having like a emergency fund, but then as a business owner, just the decisions that you make when you're okay right now. You know what I'm saying? Versus like we've all booked that client when we were like, oh, I could really use the cash.
Absolutely.
It doesn't go well.
No, I think, to your point, having that runway is, so when I say like these 6 to 12 month emergency funds, I have one. So we have a personal, we keep all, we have a business bank account, we have a personal bank account. So I approach finances as in, I need personal runway and I need business runway. They're not the same thing. So I need runway. I need an emergency fund in my business that I know I can keep the lights on and keep producing good work. And then I need an emergency fund for my life. So I know we can pay for our mortgage and our bills. And, our heating bill is crazy this month because it's winter in Philly and it's cold. So just having enough money saved that you're not as stressed out about is like completely life changing. You're not going to take the work that you don't want. Maybe you will, but you're just going to feel better. Like money is not going to run your life. I don't think about money that often, which is funny because I like thinking about money. I think it's something that as a culture we need to talk more about. I don't think it shouldn't be shameful. I grew up without much money, and I don't have that much money now, but realistically speaking, but it's something that people need to be talking about more and not afraid. Like I have friends that work 9 to 5s and their employer is like, you can't discuss your salary with your employees. And I'm like, well, who does that benefit? The employer. I just think that money is power, and being able to talk freely about it and not make it weird is like super important in how you approach life. And then to hopefully, have enough saved one day that you don't have to worry about it as much and that it allows some sort of freedom.
How long did it take you guys, if you don't mind me asking, like, how long did it take to get to that 6-month runway, if you will, or that 6 months emergency fund? Like, is that current now, or have there been situations where you've had to dive into that? Like, did it take a year to make? Like, what did that look like building that first initial one?
So when I was 18, I had no expenses, like really none, just business expenses. I was living at home still. I had I was able to save a lot of money very quickly when I started my business. And when I started, back then, it was a little bit different, the competitive landscape than it is now. It was a lot easier for sure to get well-paid work than it is now. I'm making a lot more than I did back then, but I feel like it was much easier to just have a baseline decent salary in 2008 at wedding photography than it is, 2018, 2019. It's just the landscape changes, and that's great. And there's things that we can talk about regarding that landscape. But when I was living at home, the reason I moved out, to be honest with you, was so I had money was coming in. I was doing well. I was probably about a year, maybe 2 years, like really going at this full time, still living with my parents in New Jersey. And I had a client who lived in a town over from where I grew up in Toms River, New Jersey. And they decided that instead of mailing me my check, they were going to just hand deliver it to my house, which is great. But I guess they thought I was older than I was. They probably thought I wasn't 18 at the time. But they rang the doorbell and my mom answered. And I was like, this is not a good look. I have to get out of here. So that happened, and I moved out the next month. So I didn't think about it too much, but I did have enough runway at the time to sustain a life I probably had a year's savings at that point in terms of like adult expenses, which really helped when I moved to Philadelphia, because I moved an hour and a half away to a new town that I was not established in. And I lived off that runway for probably that next year until I was able to build up enough business to like then sustain cash flow moving forward.
Yeah. And then you guys still have that runway now, or a version of that for you guys?
Yeah.
Or is that something you're still working on?
No, so to be honest, we probably have like a 10-year runway right now.
That's amazing.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's just, we've been really lucky. We've done really well over the last, it's been 11 years of thinking this way. So yes, I have a 10-year runway now maybe, but I've been doing this since I was 18. I'm almost 30. So to get to that point for me personally was saving and thinking about this since I was 18, taking it seriously since I was 18. Now in our life, like we'll be able to retire, not right this second, but I don't have to worry about money, period, about most things. And it's a very, very privileged sort of lifestyle that I'm quite frankly not used to because I grew up a very different way. It's insane. But it takes a lot of stress off of running a business.
That's amazing. So tell me about that. Like, what do you guys do practically outside of pricing and stuff like that? Are you putting a percentage away right now? Is that 10-year runway, is that one, we're getting really nitty gritty, so feel free to not answer any of these questions, but
no, I don't care.
Is that liquid, or is that also wrapped up in a few different things as well? And we can get into those too.
Yeah, a lot of it's liquid. A lot of it is wrapped up into things. Not all of it's in one place. But other than our house, I could cash out of anything pretty quickly and have that money available to me within a month if I needed it. Our house, obviously, I don't necessarily count towards that because like we were lucky enough that we bought in a gentrifying neighborhood in Philadelphia and our house is worth a bit more than we paid for it, which is sweet. But I don't really count that towards like net worth, even though it is net worth. It's very like this illiquid sort of thing that I just like live in, and it doesn't feel, for me, it doesn't
Sure.
feel the same.
Right. Now, what are you guys doing? Do you put away a certain amount every month now? Like, is that a percentage of all wedding sales or all revenue or something like that? Or are you basically done and kind of putting money away in other places?
So I think the best thing in order to save money is to live within your means, and to live well below your means. So, we make good money. Our house, we live in again, a gentrifying neighborhood in Philadelphia. Our house wasn't that expensive. A lot of people don't have that opportunity, but we work a lot in New York City or upstate New York, places that have pretty large markets with people that spend like a decent amount of money, but we choose to live in a cheaper city. We choose to live somewhere that is very extremely affordable. And that, to me, like that difference is the net that allows us to save up this much money. So I'll be honest, our mortgage is like $1,800 a month. And we have a beautiful 3-story townhouse with a backyard for our dog. And it's like, we couldn't afford this in New York City even close. Like our house in New York would be like a $5 million townhouse. But in Philly,
Right.
it's $1,800 a month and we own it. That sort of thing. But we also price ourselves to be competitive with the New York market is what allows us to save this much money. And it's a very unique situation that not everyone is able to do. So I'm like very grateful for it at the same time, but we also work really hard. We drive a lot, we travel a lot, we fly a lot to do that. So it's not necessarily a percentage. We just really try to live below our means on the monthly expenditures that we can't really control.
I love that. I love that. So are you not, other than maybe like automated investment stuff that we'll talk about, like you're not actively putting away a percentage and say, hey, from each wedding, I put away 10% or something like that?
I'm not, because to be honest with you, that's just too much to manage. There's so much else that we do that it's one more cog in that wheel that like, it's really difficult for most people to be that on top of every single dollar that comes in. I think it's a great idea. I'm not against it. We just don't have to do that. So it is very nice.
That's awesome. Now, that's kind of a fun like theory that you were talking about as far as like working in a high-paying city and then living in a little less. And not that Philly is cheap by any means.
No, it's affordable.
Right. Absolutely. Especially compared to New York. Especially like how close you are to the center of Philly is much closer than you could get for that price in closer to Manhattan or Central Park.
Yeah, it's unbelievably different. And to that point, it is interesting. So we have friends that do design. I have a friend that most of his clients are in San Francisco, but he lives in the Midwest. That's somebody that I know about. So he works remotely with San Francisco money, but he lives somewhere that has an extremely low cost of living. And that's really appealing to him for many reasons, but he's on his path to like this financial freedom because of that as well. So it doesn't apply to every city. It doesn't apply to every region, but if you're able to do that, I think it's definitely smart.
Right. No, I love that. You kind of just answered my next question, is the idea of like living pretty close. So like in DC, it's very similar to Philly or New York. And yeah, in the city is super expensive. And that's where the money is though for a lot of weddings. But like how often are you driving? One, I guess how many weddings do you do a year? And then two, are you driving to like an hour to each of them? Do you feel lucky when you get like a local Philly one? Like how does that work? And is it just something you've decided to suck up as far as like, we don't mind spending 2 hours of travel per wedding, or even more, obviously, for some, and for the sake of the lifestyle that you guys get to have?
Yeah. So something that's really interesting is that I choose this lifestyle. A lot of people don't. For example, my wife's sister, my sister-in-law, she lives in LA. She works in Santa Monica and lives in Long Beach. And her daily commute every day, her 9 to 5, is 2 hours each way. She does that every single day of her life. And she doesn't get paid fair at all, period, for the market and for her time to do that. So yes, we drive on average between 1 and 3 hours each way to a wedding. 3 hours is a lot for us. I would say probably 1 or 2. New York City is about an hour and 45 minutes from where we live right now. Yeah, I mean, we do that once a week at most. It's completely manageable. It's not that bad, especially when I compare our situation to someone like my wife's sister, where she is like driving nonstop to work. And that is just something that wears you down over time. I can manage it once a week at most. And there are certain months that are worse than others. And there are certain months where we don't drive anywhere. So it balances out. Absolutely.
Yeah. What about engagement sessions or other sessions?
Yeah, we'll travel for engagement sessions as well. We do charge a travel fee for it. So I am getting paid fairly for my time and for the wear on our car and that sort of thing. But I shoot engagements in New York City all the time. Again, it's like I'll drive for 4 hours that day to shoot for an hour. So it's kind of weird, but it's just like it's part of the job for us. And I don't necessarily mind it.
Totally. No, I love that. I love that. You're making me want to leave the city right now and go buy like a great house an hour outside of the city and be like, all right, let's go. That's incredible. I love that. And I mean, you and I know you're a car guy. Like there's also personal things. Like we enjoy being in a vehicle, listening to audiobooks or conversation or whatever.
Exactly.
And you don't like flying. So that's going to be, the car is going to be great. Right. So, that's awesome. That is really cool. And I appreciate that kind of explanation because there's a lot of that just in all the cities. I mean, I started in Philly and then I moved to DC, and there's so many quote unquote DC wedding photographers, and they don't live in DC. They live an hour out, maybe even further. And I guess on the profitability side, when I like looked at the hard numbers, it's like, oh, they're technically making less. But at the end of the day, only those hours of travel are worth a little bit less. But their cost of living overall, everything is better on the upside,
Yeah, I would say as well, like we definitely price ourselves pretty aggressively for certain markets. We're not the most expensive in town, we're not the cheapest in town, but we do really well for ourselves. And if it means that we have to drive, again, like at the end of the day, I do still feel like, 11 years later, having done this professionally, that every single year, every season for me is just like an honor that I get to do this still. There are certain times of the year where I'm just like, wow, this is like when this job is going really well, it's the best thing in the world. When this job is not going really well, it's the worst thing in the world. It's like feast or famine with wedding photography. It's like things are amazing or things are not. When things are amazing, it's a fantastic living. I don't mind listening to a podcast for a 2-hour drive to New York or something. It's part of the job.
Right. No, absolutely. It's a lot of Joe Rogan. You're like, hey, I need a 4-hour podcast. Let's go. Or some bearded talk, of course. But
bearded talk.
Yeah, exactly. We've talked about that kind of stuff. So tell me a little bit more, kind of what we talked about at workshop, where you're just getting into quote unquote retirement, but obviously we're not thinking about the actual act of retirement when we say that. We're thinking about the financial aspect of planning for that. What are just give me everything Pat, on retiring for entrepreneurs, what we should know, where we should start. Like how can somebody start from zero, and what should they start doing essentially?
I think the first thing that people need to understand is to find out where your money is actually going. So just look at your expenses, throw them into like Mint or something similar, personal expenses and business expenses, and see where do you spend your money on? Where is it going? Just like look at it and don't feel bad. You're not doing anything wrong. Just see where it's going. And that will inform choices for how you will sort of spend your life financially. That thing first is really important, just to have a general large sense of your financial picture. Second thing I think it's really important is if you don't work with an accountant or a CPA, you should do that now. It will save you more money than it costs without question. By a magnitude of like 10x, whatever your accountant costs he'll probably pay, he or she will pay for themselves at least 10 times over. So if you're spending $1,000 on an accountant, you're probably going to save at least $10,000 if they're good at their job. So that is something that is really important. And in that line, before you're able to save money, taxes are a part of life. There was, when I played World of Warcraft, we were in a guild. It was a pretty good guild in high school at the time, and it was called Death and Taxes. And they are two of the most sort of essential things in life. Like you can't really avoid either of them. So unless, you can, but so I think it's really smart to structure yourself in a way that allows you to be in a tax advantage situation. And I think that's something that, talking with an accountant or a CPA, I am not one of them. And I'm just a photographer that sort of learned this as I went along. Talking with someone that knows this stuff really hyper well, after you've understood the large picture for your finances and where that money is going, like those two steps for me are the biggest. And then after that, I would go into, well, how is your business structured? Are you an S-Corp? Are you an LLC? Are you a sole proprietor? How is the business structured? And then break that down with your accountant and figure out which is the best avenue for you to run your business.
I love that. What about can you talk about some of the options that there are for people? And although we know that you're not an accountant, like just kind of the pluses and minuses of some of those that you've seen and what those look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, the bottom rung would be, I don't want to say bottom rung, but like the easiest option is a sole proprietor, where all of the business income is classified on your Schedule C, just the same as your personal income would be. It's a sole proprietorship, not a legal entity. It just refers to a person who owns the business and that's personally responsible for that business's debt and assets, just as they would be for their own personal debt and assets. The flaw with that, there are a few. One, it's really easy from an accounting perspective, which is a huge plus, but it is technically really easy to get audited as a sole proprietor if you're a self-employed photographer. There was a study by Baker Sullivan Hoover that I read a while ago, where sole proprietors are 3 times more likely to be audited than someone who's an S-Corp or an LLC taxed as an S-Corp. The reason being, they're really too aggressive with deductions. They don't report the right amount of income. They misclassify workers, and they are technically hobbies running as a business. There's like a little bit of a gray zone with like hobby losses versus, is this an actual business? Or are you just like doing this on the side? There are some things there that are a little risky, and there's no real protection to separate your business assets from your personal assets. It's really easy to lose your car or your house if your business goes under and some clients come after you. That's something that I really don't recommend. And then sort of a ring up from that, which would be a lot of people are LLCs in the wedding photography world. It's just a structure that can combine that pass-through taxation that you get with sole proprietor with a limited liability of a corporation. Easy to set up, pretty flexible, offers some more protection than an S-Corp would, but there's a common misconception. I'm an LLC, right? Limited liability, etc. My house is safe if something were to happen. To be honest with you, from reading case studies on this sort of thing, if you got sued, if something is that bad, you've done something horribly wrong and you've really made a mistake. So that's something that should be avoided if possible. If you can't avoid that, if it comes down to it, I mean, most lawsuits are won by people what side has more money, right? It's not who is structured what way or how's your contract written. It's, well, who has more money to fight this problem? And that really, unfortunately, determines a lot of outcomes in court cases in America. So like just becoming an LLC does not mean that your house is safe. No, you have to run a good business. You have to hopefully not mess up. But it does provide some more protection than a sole proprietor would, which has essentially zero. And then one rung up from that, really, in terms of, at least for photographers, things that you guys should be thinking about would be an S corporation, which is a small business corporation. It's a business elected for S corporation status through the IRS. It allows the taxation of the company to be similar to a partnership, but you pay taxes based on a corporate tax structure. A common way to do this for wedding photographers or for self-employed creatives is to start an LLC. That there's a form you can fill out where you elect to be taxed as an S corporation. So you're still an LLC on paper, you're still an LLC business structure-wise, but you're you're electing to be taxed as an S corporation, which then you pay yourself a W-2 like you would have from a 9-to-5 job, and taxes come out of that for your personal taxes. And any money that you don't pay yourself in salary, it's called distributions, they don't get hit with self-employment tax. So you save, 7.5% on the money that you're not paying yourself as a salary that your business is still making. That's a huge percentage for most people. Some cities have leniencies with companies that are taxed as corporations where they get to avoid certain local taxes depending on how those cities are set up. There's a lot of things, a lot of like nuance to setting up as an S corporation that I recommend talking through with an actual accountant. But there's plenty of ways to save money as an S corporation. We are technically an S corporation. We pay, both myself and Claire get a W-2 from ourselves to ourselves. And I switched probably 4 years ago, and I do recommend it. But maybe not for everyone. There are certain situations where other structures work best.
Totally. It seems like from what I've heard and even just talking to you and going to the workshop is like taking that step. So some people, I feel like maybe I'm an optimist about this, but at least the people that I've talked to on the Bearded Dog and listeners who've messaged me about it, the majority of people feel like when they get an LLC, they're a legit business. So, and I say that in the way that like they've at least taken that step. Or even when I started, I was a sole proprietor for a long time, just because I thought that I didn't need it. I had a large insurance plan to like save me, hopefully, part of the triangle, if you will, the legal triangle I could use as my defense. And, so I feel like a lot of people are an LLC, but the main concern the difference is, one, I've heard a certain amount of money tossed out. Maybe it's like 250K in revenue a year is like when you should start looking at an S-Corp or something like that. And maybe that's inaccurate. Maybe that just applies to that particular person. But it seems like there is a little bit more of and maybe your accountant does this for you. I don't know, but there's a little bit more paperwork when you're an S-Corp. And then what is and I'm just quizzing you now for fun. What is can you technically become like a full S-Corp instead of just being, is there a difference than just being taxed as an S-Corp? And does that matter, I guess, legally?
To be honest with you, I think you can, but I don't know the exact nuance of the difference between how you would tax a full S corporation versus an LLC that elects to become one. I do know there is a lot more paperwork involved. There's different things that you have to report with, like shareholder things involving your business. Right. There's definitely a lot more paperwork involved. Your accountant cost will probably double. My accountant, probably 2.5x versus when I was an LLC versus just being an S-Corp, because there are so many more forms. In terms of the actual dollar figure for when you switch or consider switching, it's really hard. And it's something that you really have to like run the numbers yourself to see what makes more sense. For example, a big part of the savings for an S-Corp is that self-employment tax, but it sort of limits itself around, I think, $113,000 to $118,000, which is like you hit a threshold where you don't necessarily pay, like it doesn't exponentially get worse. So if you're an LLC making that much money, it probably isn't in your best interest to become an S corporation. So I would say you need to be clearing at least $100,000 before I would consider it, just based on the extra paperwork, headache, etc. If you're killing it and you're making a bunch of money, it's something that you should consider, but it's not right for everybody. There are downsides, and we can talk about some downsides as well with when it comes to how you sort of put money away for retirement. There are different tax advantaged accounts that you can take advantage of as an S corporation, but you're not able to put as much money away as if you were an LLC or a sole proprietor. So you said that triangle, that balanced triangle, it's more of like an octagon. There are things from like every direction. There's just so many things to consider. And I don't want to say one size fits all. It's just, I want to put these ideas into people's minds so they can think about it and talk about it with a CPA, an accountant, or someone that they work with tax-wise to really figure out if it's best for them. Because, for a long period of time, I would hear on forums, on Facebook from other photographers, oh, just become an S-Corp, just do this, just do that. They're giving really personal advice as if it's not that personal, if it's just blanket statement, do this thing, but you have to dive into it further than that before you can decide if it's good for you.
Right. No, absolutely. Just for kind of giving like a practical example though, for an S-Corp, let's pretend that the person brought in, we'll use easy numbers just for fun, like 150K in revenue, right? So, we'll just say for sake of argument, they shot 10, $15,000 weddings. Great. And then let's say, we could even say 50K of it went to business stuff, like business expenses, right? Yep. And then they need to make, for their W-2 or whatever, we'll say 50K, right? Like they're living in a great area. So they have 50K left over in the middle. And that's like in the business, that you said that can come out through what's called distributions. Is that like a profit distribution every quarter, or is that something different? And then that can still, like, I guess the big question with that, when people hear that can still go to Pat, like it's, it can still go from Pat Furey Photography to Pat Furey the person. It's just not going via a W-2, right? Or
correct.
If you're like, hey,
yeah.
like if
it's a non-W-2 income would be a distribution, and that you do pay taxes on that. You just don't pay self-employment taxes on that. So the difference in your scenario with, let's say there's $150,000 minus 50 for expenses. Let's say you're looking to pay Uncle Sam. In their eyes, you've made about $100,000, just a clean, easy number. And then you have to pay yourself a reasonable salary as defined by the IRS. You have to come up with what you deem reasonable, and you have to have a good reason for it. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to pay myself $20,000 and save a bunch of money. That's a bad idea. Let's say if you're making 150, sure, it might be reasonable. So then let's say there's an extra 50,000. It is money you can use. You can distribute it from the company to yourself, completely fine. But you then think about, well, what are the actual tax savings on that? And it's really easy to calculate. So if there's a $50,000 difference, which let's just say roughly 7%, because it's an even number, of 50,000 is $3,500. So that's the max amount of money you're going to save in this scenario. But, the downside is there's going to be a lot more paperwork. There's going to be a headache. You have to also pay payroll taxes because you're W-2ing yourself. you're going to have to pay for the actual payroll service. I use Gusto, love Gusto. They're really good, but it's like 50-ish or 30-ish a month plus the actual money that I'm paying for other things. So like if I was only going to stand to save $3,500 in taxes per year on something that is going to be a lot more of a time sink for me, cost a lot more for my accountant to prepare the forms, and I have to W-2 myself, and then taxes come out of that as well. Like it doesn't seem worth it to me at that level. There has to be a greater threshold, and you have to figure that out for yourself.
And that threshold, are you talking about the money potentially used for distribution, right? That needs to be the threshold of like, how much would you actually get back?
Yep. Because that distribution money is the money that you're saving the self-employment tax on. So like if you're making 150,000, 50,000 for expenses, and then you pay so it's 100,000, let's say you pay yourself 50, and then you have a $50,000 distribution. That's your money. You can do what you please with it. It's just not salaried income. That money is the chunk of savings that you're going to get for being an S-Corp. So if you were to double that, then you're going to save, $7,000. So it becomes more beneficial as you make more money. And it kind of becomes a headache at the figures that we're talking about now, because in order to do this, like I have to pay my accountant at least an extra $1,000 a year. Okay. So then then I'm going to save $2,500 a year in taxes. Then I have to pay for payroll. Let's just say $500 a year in taxes. Okay, so I'm only up $2,000. And this is something that there's a lot more forms involved. It's a lot scarier than people think it is. If you have an accountant, they can handle it for you. But I don't know if it's worth it for the amount of work required to only save $2,000 a year in taxes. It's not that much money, realistically speaking. There are other ways that you can save money on your taxes that you can actually put money away. We'll talk about later for retirement.
Right, because it makes sense. Like if you, let's say that 7% that you're saving is, let's say they had $100,000 in profit, available money, then it's $7K they're saving. But yeah, like you said, like they're paying their accountant a lot more. They're paying their payroll, they're paying the fees, and then like the potential headache of all that, it's definitely doable. But I guess obviously like you and whoever else is an S-Corp like has to decide when that is worth it. So that's a good idea there. If like, as far as a rule of thumb would be like, hey, you have to decide how that's worth it. We should make a calculator and see like,
we should, yeah.
That way you could tell like, is it worth it for you to switch to an S-Corp? And I guess too, if you already have an accountant, like you could ask, especially this time, like you're going to get all your tax stuff back from your accountant, ping them and say, hey, do you think it'd be wise for me to switch to an S-Corp, right? Like this is the perfect time to talk to them about it.
Yeah. And, I've been with my accountant since I started my business, and we've certainly learned, and we've both grown together, and it's been a really good relationship. I'm very happy with him, but there were pain points along the way because there was a lot of things that are not unique to photography, but just things that not everyone might know about all the time, even though they're very, very experienced tax professionals. That you have to be your own, sort of advocate for these things. You really have to push for it. You have to read articles. You have to listen to podcasts. You have to do things for yourself and then present them to your accountant and then say, okay, this is what I've learned. Now, what do you think about this? How do we apply it to my situation? You can't just go in blind and expect them to just know every little magic button to push for how to best manage your money. You really have to take the initiative yourself, I think, to learn more about this. And then you don't have to know an expert. You don't have to know as much as an expert, but you have to come at it not just baseline. You have to have some understanding before you approach your professional about these things, or it might not be as good of a collaboration between you two as possible.
Right. No, absolutely. That's super good insight, because it's definitely complicated. It can be scary, but yeah, and being audited sounds terrifying. So yeah, I definitely don't want that to happen at all.
Yeah, not something that people sign up for sure.
Right. Awesome, man. So I want to, before we wrap this up, I want to dive in real quick to, one, what were some of the other tax saving ideas that you had mentioned for small business owners? And then what is your goal personally, at least you and Claire, like, it's definitely, I just know you personally, so I don't think it's to be quote unquote rich, but the idea of, is your goal to keep building on that runway and then say you get to 40 or 45 and you just like, you pull the ripcord and you're like, all right, we're done. We don't shoot anything anymore. Or like, what's that kind of look like for you?
Yeah, the goal for me has never been clearly defined. It moves and it changes over time. The goal for me when I was a kid growing up in New Jersey was to not live the way that I lived growing up. So that was the goal. And you reach these goals and then they become things that you look back on and you go, that's really funny. My original goal as a photographer when I was 18 was to make, I think, $30,000 a year. I was like, if I can do that, man, like I'll be set. Like I was like, that'll be great. That was for me, that was like a huge goal for me. And then, now in our life, if we don't make that in a quarter, I'm like kind of bummed. Like, I'm like, oh shit, like we're going out of business. Like things change. I think you need to be flexible with how you approach life because you'll get curveballs. Things won't go your way. Things might go better than you expected. So for me, I really want to remain flexible with like what we see our end result being in wedding photography. For me personally, that said, I want to do this for as long as I enjoy it. And hopefully when I stop enjoying it, I have enough money saved up that I no longer have to do it. I don't want to begrudgingly show up to weddings and shoot them if I don't want to. Right now, I still enjoy what we do for a living. It's still really fun. It's super challenging. When it becomes not that way, I want that there's a bar on the right? And that bar is going down with your enjoyment of whatever you're doing for a career. And then the bar on the right is going up for how much money you have saved. And when those bars sort of level out, that's usually when, I'm going to pull that ripcord and say, okay, cool. I did this as best I could for as long as I could. And I had a great time doing it. Hopefully we have enough money saved up by then to be less reliant on wedding photography, self-employment, whatever it might be at the time. So that's for me, sort of how I approach just like planning things because, these things change and I don't expect anyone to have a clearly defined path because I'll be honest, like things will change. You'll get, curveballs and it might not go as planned. So just be flexible, but still have an overall just a vision for where you do want to go one day. I think that's really important. To your point though, about how to save money in taxes while also putting money away. And this just probably should have been something we talked about a little bit earlier because I could go on and on for hours. So I'm sorry. But
it's all right. We'll stop you.
To retire, let's say you need 23 times your yearly expenses, roughly. So let's say because of inflation, because the cost of living is going to get more expensive by the time I'm old enough to retire.
Did you say 23 times?
Let's say I need about $100,000 a year just on life. And that's a lot for sure. That means I need $2.3 million in an account getting interest in the market in order to retire, which is an absurd amount of money. So retirement is more expensive than people think. So the sooner you can start putting money away, the sooner these things compound and grow and the less you'll have to work over time. So just like the best time to start something, honestly, it was yesterday, but the second best time to start something is like right now. So just sign up for some sort of retirement account and just start putting money away now. And it is scary at first, but it's really, really simple and you don't have to think about it and it's super easy. There are two really good tax advantage accounts that I'd recommend photographers and any self-employed person look into. The first one's called a SEP. It stands for a simplified employee pension. Anyone who has freelance income or a business owner with one or more employees can open one. You can put up to 25% of your total compensation up to a maximum of $55,000 per year. The money you put into that is deducted against your income taxes for that year. So let's say you make $100,000 is the number we've been using. You earn $100,000 after expenses. That's the amount of money that you'd be taxed on. So you owe the IRS as if you made $100,000. If you have a SEP account and let's say you put away the maximum, which is 25% of your income, which is $25,000, you're only then taxed to Uncle Sam as if you've made $75,000. You pay taxes on the difference when you take that money out at retirement. Hopefully, when you retire one day, your tax bracket situation will be a little bit lessened. When people retire, they usually make less income than when they're at the height of their career. So when you take it out, yes, you pay taxes on it, but hopefully you're not making as much. Hopefully you're making more money, but the reality of it is that people are usually making less by the time they retire. That's the first one I recommend. The second one is the individual 401k, which is better than a SEP if you're able to put away way more money. So individuals can contribute up to $100,000 of the first $18,500 of compensation, plus an additional 25% on top of that. So in this same scenario, right, you have $100,000 that you're being taxed on. If you had a SEP account, you put away $25,000 and the government taxes you as if you made $75,000. So that's a decent net savings. With an individual 401k, your taxes if you've made $61,500 if you're able to put away the maximum of $38,500 in this scenario. So that difference between the SEP and the individual 401k is $13,500 more that you can put away with an individual 401k if you're at the $100,000 threshold. So those are, for most people, a SEP is probably fine. Putting away 25% of your income is extremely aggressive, but I recommend it if possible. So most people don't need to go the 401k, the individual 401k route, but the SEP is definitely something that I think every self-employed person should be taking advantage of. It's huge. You save so much money, and as you're saving tax money, you have money in the market making you money. So over time, it's really going to benefit you.
I love that. I love that. It is sad when, because the thing that I heard is like tax saving is not necessarily, it's not like you get to keep the money, but you don't get to play with it when you put it in the SEP.
Which to be honest is smart. Yeah. It's like we have clients all the time that they're like, hey, like they're trying to get a deal. Do you guys take cash? And I'm like, well, no, because if I have your cash, I can't invest it. I can't pay my mortgage. I'm going to buy a dumb toy with it. Like I'll buy a guitar or a video game thing or a new TV, or like, I'm not going to do with what I should with that money. I would rather it go through the official channels and me get taxed on it, which is crazy to say, because then I can be more responsible with my income. So for me, cash is honestly useless because I'm just going to waste it on dumb things. I'm going to spend it on things I don't need. If I have money going through my account, going through all these things that we've talked about today, 100%. I'm on board with what you just said.
I love it, man. That is so good. It's obvious that we need to have you back on and we can talk about even more stuff because this is obviously a huge topic and it's very complex, but the potential benefits and the desire to, honestly, you're just taking care of your future self financially. Like that's what we're trying to do here. And I love that, man. And I appreciate that. And you motivated me. 10 years of a 10-year runway. I need that right now. That's my new goal.
Well,
that's
to
my
be
10x
honest,
goal.
Yeah, it's great, but it's also, it's 10 years because our expenses are so low. We own our car outright. I have no debt, no credit card debt, don't have student loans. The only thing I have to pay for really is our mortgage. So for me, that 10-year runway, if I was different, could look a different way for someone else. So I don't think, it's awesome. I'm super grateful for it, but everyone's situation is different. Especially nowadays, like, baby boomers like ruining our economy. Everyone has like a ton of student loan debt, like job wages are stagnant. Like it's really hard for sure. So like, yes, it's aspirational, but it might not be realistic for everyone at the same time. So like, don't take it negatively if people are not doing that well. I still think there's a lot to be gained in the interim and a lot to learn and a lot to empower yourself with about finances that you're going to be really happy. Like I was happy 11 years ago when my accountant told me, listen, man, like you really need to start a SEP account. You need to put as much money as you possibly can away. I've been maxing that account out since I was 18 because of him. So someone told me this and I really took it seriously. And I want people to, just hear about these terms and take them seriously. And then when you're 60 years old, you can send me an email if I'm still in business, or just find my email and be like, listen, I listened to your podcast in 2019 with Adam, and I took that stuff seriously. And, now I was able to, help my family with money, or I was able to save for retirement, or I was able to buy, whatever you need to live. I think you have to take control of this stuff and just like not be like weirded out to talk about it, and to also to talk about it with people, because everyone has a different mindset on this, and not one way is correct. It's just start the narrative, start thinking about it, and just kind of like use this to your advantage, not to your disadvantage. Allow this to empower you, not bring you down.
I love it, man. Pat, where can people go to find you and talk to you and probably slide into your DMs and ask you a bunch more questions, man? Where can they go to find you?
I'm on Instagram at Pat Furey Photo. We are also at patfuryphoto.com. So you can find us there. My wife is Claire Loves Love on Instagram. You can find her there. She shoots weddings with us. She's a huge part of she is, the better half of our business. Absolutely. And she also shoots boudoir. So we have a few things going on, but that's where you can find us. I'd love to hear from you guys. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions, or if you guys need anything at all. I'm here for you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Pat.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Adam.
Wow, what a freaking genius, basically. I love Pat so much because he's just so kind and he's just so patient. Like, if you ever meet him in person, obviously when he gets excited, he speeds up his speech a little bit, same as I do, but he's just very thorough, he's very thought out, and you got to think too, like, who are you listening to in the industry? And I'll be honest, I have not been doing this for 11 years. My first wedding was in 2011, so let's give it 7-8 years. Pat's been doing this for 11 years, but he's still very modern. He's not necessarily I don't consider him in like the old Reich of photographers. He's not like the classic person. Like, he's modern. His stuff is cool. His stuff is amazing. And he has so much insight into these parts of this job that we just don't talk about. And I love that. And so I wanted to have him on. It's obvious we need to have him on again because we could just talk money and cash and planning and pricing all day. And somebody that experience is going to have a lot of good systems for people to dive into. So I hope that you enjoyed that. I hope that that was valuable for you. Shoot me a DM on Instagram or an email. Let me know that that was awesome for you, thebeardedtalk@gmail.com. And what you want to hear from Pat, again, we can always have him back on. He's a super gracious host, and he's really, really fun. All that to say, there are lots of goodies for you via links in the show notes, different things that are free for you, and different ways to learn more about The Bearded Talk and learn more from me, and we can kind of give you more resources so you can be successful. And I have one favor. Share this episode with a friend. Share this episode with another entrepreneur or a freelancer or in your Rising Tide group or something like that, and just have them get a little inspired about money and these things that we don't talk about. Let's just get inspired about it. We're in charge of our destiny, and let's just make this happen. So I would love if you share this episode with just one friend. That would be really, really cool. Have a great day, guys. Keep being awesome.